Greetings. This is General CJG here, coming to you with, well, the second part of our Bounty Hunter Wars Trilogy podcast series. Yep, this time we're dealing with the second book, The Slave Ship. And joining me here, of course, is none other than.
Django Fett.
Yep, he's back with helping me on the second book, so let's get on with it. So I guess we should start with our, thoughts on this book before we go in depth into the story and everything else. So Django, go ahead.
Okay. So this was another really good book, and it doesn't really focus on the present time with Boba Fett after the Sarlacc pit episode. This book mainly focuses on the past, which is not a bad thing. I mean, It definitely has some more things about Kuat of Kuat and Prince Zizor and Boba Fett working with Boss. So there's a lot that happens that I do like. So there's that.
Yeah, it definitely has more focus on the past, which is good because it definitely is shaping up to setting up the events for the third book, which is going to be pretty much a conclusion for the Bounty Hunter Wars. So that definitely helps. And yeah, there's plenty to talk from Boba Fett to, of course, she saw what he was doing to, of course, God of Quad. Like, there's plenty to discuss. So there's that. And small bit of info regarding me and this book. I actually had a bit of history with this book years ago. Found these books in my elementary school at one point, the library, and I actually read a few pages. And well, I couldn't specifically say which part I specifically was reading through. I was assuming it was one in which Boba Fett was either in his Slave 1 or in Hound's 2. Can't remember correctly. So, but yeah, so I pretty much had some history with this book, though not as much as say episode 1 novelization or an episode 3 novelization. So yeah, I do have a bit of history with this book. And now that I fully read it, well, definitely now I understand it way more than I did back then, because back then I didn't even read the first book. I didn't even know it was part of a trilogy. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So there is that.
And also something we didn't point out in the last episode, but we weren't really sure why the first book was called Mandalorian Armor in the first place, and we kind of speculated quite a bit. But you want to go over that a little bit, CJ?
Sure.
Okay. So why it was called Mandalorian Armor, we have theories behind it, but it's not a definite behind why it's called Mandalorian Armor. I don't know if you wanted to start, CJ, because I still have pondered over it, but I still can't figure it out.
So one of the theories we had was that it possibly meant regarding Boba Fett having been saved from the Sarlacc pit and his armor kind of having been like put in the wayside, and that being like the only thing that identifies the man that was injured, almost died from digestion of the Sarlacc pit. Like that scarred man, the only thing that establishes him as Boba Fett is his trademark Mandalorian armor. Because without it, well, with all those injuries and everything, you wouldn't really recognize him as Boba Fett. And seeing that this was a trilogy released before even Episode 1 of Phantom Menace come out, well, basically Boba Fett here, it was before he was even established being a clone of Jango Fett. So back then, we actually didn't even know what Boba Fett looked like inside the helmet. Obviously now we know that he's pretty much just Tamora Morrison, Jango Fett, basically. But of course, it's not Jango Fett, it's actually Boba Fett, though he does look strikingly like him. Though with the scars and everything, it probably looks more like I guess kind of like what we saw in Mandalorian Season 2, when we first saw Boba Fett, but without the armor, like in terms of what he looks like beneath the helmet. But yeah, so I guess the only thing would be in regards to why it was called the Mandalorian armor was that the armor is like the only thing that pretty much confirmed that Boba Fett, well, not only well, I guess the man that survived the Sarlacc was indeed Boba Fett, because without the armor, nobody would even know. And the armor was like put alongside Boba Fett while he was unconscious in the previous book. So that's our theory as to why it was called the Mandalorian armor. So That seems to be it. In this book's case, why is it called Slave Ship? Two reasons. One of them is an easy one. So turns out that most of the time Boba Fett, Dengar, and Neela are flying together is not on the slave ship, but actually Bosk's ship, the Hound's Tooth. So, which they're pretty much taken as their own for the time being. So you could, in a way, say it's Boba Fett's slave ship, if you say so. So there's that, and there's also the fact that in the flashbacks, well, we have Boba Fett pretty much having the slave one while carrying all sorts of, well, not slaves, more like bounties. So yeah, there's those two meanings, but I think the main one is that Hound's Tooth, Bosk's ship, is under the command of Boba Fett at this point in time. So that's the main reason why this one is called a slave ship. Whereas the previous book didn't have much of an idea. It would have to be something related to Boba Fett's armor, but no idea. So
Right. Yeah, I'm with you on that, and especially with going back with the Mandalorian armor. That armor did help save him against the Sarlacc pit, because the Sarlacc pretty much slowly digests whoever is in that pit, whoever's in the Sarlacc. It's like acid is just eating away, and it was eating away Boba Fett. And if he didn't have that armor, it would most likely have killed him right then and there. So, yeah, that's that. And then regarding slave ship, absolutely, I definitely see why this was called slave ship, because a lot of it happens on the slave ship. But I would also argue that this should have been called hard merchandise at the same time, because they say hard merchandise a few times in this book.
There's a very good reason why the next one is called hard merchandise, and it's because of the events that are set by this book. Because this one deals with the flashbacks, but the hard merchandise I'm referring to is actually something that's set up with what's going to be told in the third book. So there's actually a good reason why the third book is called hard merchandise, whereas this one is a slave ship. So there's actually a good reason. So don't worry about that. And once we get into the story details, I'll elaborate on to why. So there's that. Speaking of that, shall we now get into the full story, Django? No more to discuss on our overall summarized thoughts on the book?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so I guess we start with where we kind of left off at the end, which is basically Boba Fett and the Slave One leaving Tatooine. So, yeah, except that there's a catch that, of course, the previous book didn't note on. And it was that apparently Bosk had wired the Slave One to detonate. And he was ready to detonate it. But let's just say Fett was ahead of that, as he always is. Oh, God. So, basically, Bosk had wired Slave One with pretty much bombs ready to detonate it. Except that Boba Fett had gotten a hidden message to his helmet from the ship, because his ship apparently is wired with all sorts of security alarms and all sorts of devices that can be straight up interface with Boba Fett's armor. And so he knew that somebody had wired explosives. And so Boba Fett, he found the explosives. He put them in a separate probe and put the probe to have the Slave One ID. He sent the probe flying to space, and Bosk detonated it, and, well, the decoy ship was destroyed, but the real Slave One was like, yeah, we're right here, Bosk, so too bad. So, to put it simply, not only has Boba Fett's master plan on fooling Bosk worked, but he managed to even make Bosk believe that there was a bomb inside his own ship. like Boba had communicated into the Hound's Tooth's comm system and was like, there's a bomb inside it. It's gonna explode in 20 seconds. 20. 19, and it was like counting down, and Bosk was like, damn it, and he pretty much was like going to the escape pod, and he gets to the escape pod, and he's like away, and then the countdown is still going in the escape pod, so apparently the bomb was in the escape pod, and he gets the bomb, and it's gonna explode, and it didn't explode. It was just a fake dummy bomb that that Boba Fett planted in there. And Bosk was like, damn you, Fett! Oh my god. Yeah, and so Boba managed to not only ruin Bosk's plans, but he even managed to fool him into thinking that his ship was going to explode, forcing him to go to the escape pod, which was going to crash down on Tatooine, leaving the Hound's Tooth completely up to the mercy of Boba Fett and his crew. And they used it to pretty much escape Tatooine, leave the Slave One like floating there in the orbit of Tatooine, so that way people would believe that Boba Fett is dead, as a reminder that he's still in the Sarlacc pit's stomach, and they were taking the Hound's Tooth as a means of travel. So, yeah, that was Boba Fett's plan. What do you think of that master plan, Django?
It just goes to show you that Boba doesn't even have to be there to just outwit whoever. And especially when it comes to Bosk, who's kind of... He seems to be like... Behind Boba Fett seems to be a little bit smarter compared to the other bounty hunters that we've seen in the past. But it's not really saying that much. So you just can't outwit Boba Fett.
I only think Dengar is smarter than Bosk, but still not good enough as Boba Fett.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, combat prowess, he's probably second to Boba Fett in that way. Mm-hmm. But brains, no.
Yeah, Boba Fett is both. So, there's that indeed. So, yeah. That happened. And then, well, then here's an interesting bit of info, which it was one of the flashback scenes, because if I'm not mistaken, once the Houndstooth left off and Dengar and Neela, they pretty much settled themselves inside the ship, pretty much waiting for whatever destination Boba Fett planted the ship in to go to. Dengar was pretty much retelling the story of what happened before the Bounty Hunter Wars. And one quick interesting bit of info is that apparently this book states that the Kua Tribe Yards were the ones that created and manufactured the Slave One, and that it was requested by Boba Fett to do so. But, of course, Episode 2, Attack the Clones, and Star Wars Bounty Hunter pretty much retconned that. So, in reality, the ship was more heavily modified by the Kua Tribe Yards, not actually built. As you remember from Star Wars Bounty Hunter, the Slave One is actually a fire spray class attack ship from the Republic prison. So basically, the Slave One we see after the events of the prequels, it's pretty much just heavily modified by the Kua Tribe Yards, which also explains the different paint job that has compared to the blue and yellow from before. So that's that bit of info. I don't know if you knew about that one, Django?
Yeah, I must have forgotten about that. I must have missed that. But yeah, that's a pretty important bit when it comes to Boba Fett's ship.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. And one of the reasons why that's important is because apparently Kuat of Kuat, from Kua Tribe Yards, he apparently remembers that the Slave One was, quote-unquote, built by them. And so he apparently has a few things inside the Slave One that Kuat wants to recover from the ship, including the small little droid that was stuck inside the Slave One. Do you remember the one that was found by Boss in the previous book? The one that had the recording of the stormtroopers attacking Luke's homestead and that apparently had a scent of pheromones from Shizor. So that's actually the droid that Kuat wants to recover. So he wanted to get Boba Fett's ship back, but he's going to have to wait on that because by getting that ship would be a problem because apparently some rebel pilots actually managed to get their hands on it and they want to sell it. So yeah, it's going to be difficult for him to get his hands on the Slave One for the time being. So there is that indeed. And so, yeah, that's basically one thing about the Slave One. And another thing to mention when telling the story, or at least before that, is that Boba Fett had told his crew that I'm the one almost in charge. You two are just my assistant partners, like my backup partners. You're not, there's no, we're going to discuss what to do. No. I get to the decisions. You guys are just going to follow me. Or otherwise, it's going to go bad for you too. Yeah, he told that to Dengar. And then Neela pretty much just overheard it. And yeah. And after that, Dengar just pretty much was telling the previous flashback stories to Neela. And that's where that went. So, yeah. What do you think, Django, in regards to Boa saying, I'm the one calling the shots. You guys stay put.
I mean, that's typical Boba Fett. He has to take in charge no matter what. And especially if you're working with him. And Dengar was kind of flabbergasted, and he was trying to be like, I thought we were partners and everything. He's like, hey, we'll be partners and everything, but you're working for me. And he was coming to a point where Dengar was a little bit arguing over it, and Boba was like, "Okay, does that mean that we're ending our partnership? Is that the way you want to go with this?" And Dengar's like, no, no, never mind. Forget I said anything."
Oh my god. Poor. I mean, I feel a bit bad for Dengar regarding that,
Yeah.
but it's Boba Fett, so I guess you should have known. But damn, poor Dengar right there. So, but yeah, so that's what happened. So now we go to the flashback. So the Django, do you want to go with what happened first in the flashback story?
Which one is that?
The first thing is in regards to Kudar Mubat, the big spider, pretty much talking simultaneously to the True Guild or the messenger of the True Guild, and Bosk from the Guild of who represents the Guild of Reform Committee. Basically, the two factions that the Bounty Hunters Guild has split off after Bosk murdered Kredusk. So yeah, basically that's the part, the first thing that happens in this flashback. So yeah, I want to talk about a bit about that.
True Guild and the Guild Reform Committee.
Yeah, both had like their representatives go to Kudar Mubat to ask about if Kudar Mubat was on their side or not. And Kudar Mubat being Kudar Mubat, he wanted to pretty much be friendly to both because he wanted business with both. So yeah, indeed. And he himself was talking to the True Guild, while the Guild of Reform Community, aka Bosk, he was being talked on with by one of the notes from Kular Mubat, was called Balance Sheet, which apparently has more independence and more for brains inside him than a regular spider knot that Kular Mubat has. So he was able to like have this fake corpse or model of Kular Mubat and managed to like literally control it and even talk like it to full Bosk and think he was talking to the real Kular Mubat. So that's what happened in there. Like Kudar Mulat was talking with the True Guild representative, and Balance Sheet was talking to the Guild of Reform Committee representative, which is Bosk. So basically, two negotiations happened at the same time, but not supposedly with the same entity, Kudar Mulat, but in reality, Kudar was attending one, and Balance Sheet was attending the other. So that's what was happening.
Yeah, and Balance Sheet will definitely do some more treachery later on. So it'll be interesting to see if Gudamabot catches on to things and does something about Balance Sheet.
I'm surprised he hasn't like already done something, because once those negotiations ended, Kwarmovat was like, "Yeah, I have to deal with this now. Like, deal with Balance Sheet immediately. Like, actually find him and already ingest him and get another Balance Sheet or something." Like, I'm surprised, because Balance Sheets are still alive even at the end of this book, so that is surprising. In the flashback scene, that is.
Mhm.
So, so yeah, there is that, and apparently this bit of negotiations from both parties to Kodar Muvat got into the ears of Prince Shisor. Yeah, he managed to know that apparently, yeah, Kodar Muvat has negotiated with both sides of the Bounty Hunters Guild. Even the ghosting nest is not a secure place for Shisor spies to not get in there. Yeah, wherever you go, it seems like Shizor will know about it no matter what, because that's Black Sun for you. And next, oh, this is interesting. So next we got Boba Fett hunting Ob Fortuna. You remember him, the Django? Kratos' Twi'lek majordomo? Basically his butler of sorts.
Oh yes, yeah.
And he had taken refugee or protection from somebody named Shulak, who was using a modified C-95 headhunter in order to transport him and Fortuna. And he had made this trap in preparation for Boba Fett, because Fortuna knew that Boba Fett was going to go after him. So he pretty much paid Shulak to, hey, protect me from Boba Fett. He's gonna come soon. And come indeed he did. So, the Django, do you want to say what happened in those events? Or shall I do it?
Oh, you can do it.
Okay, so basically, the headhunter was like flying somewhere in space. Slave 1 had lied in wait, waiting for it. And once Fett saw a ship, he was like going straight to it. Unfortunately, the headhunter somehow disappeared. It vanished. It like seemed like Like it somehow disappeared, but according to the Slave One's radar, it was actually still there. There was no hyperspace trajectory or anything listed in it. So the ship was still there somewhere. So he was searching for it. Apparently, Boba Fett collided with one invisible Durasteel like armor plating that was put somewhere in there as a means of making the Slave One crash on it. So that way it will destroy the ship. And Fett was almost gonna crash with a second one because there were two Durasteel plates. But he managed to actually go into hyperspace to avoid the crash, and then he returned and he managed to pretty much get around the trap that Shulak had put. Shulak was so confident that the slave one was destroyed. There was no way Fett survived it. Oh, but he did. And he boarded a headhunter, and he took off Fortuna. Yeah. That happened. So, yeah, what do you think of that, Django?
Not surprising to see Boba Fett just go through every defenses. I mean, he is. It just shows how just supremely intelligent he is compared to every other person out there, and his intellect is like rivals like many of the smartest, like powerful leaders out there. Like he is just a very very smart opponent, and he just knows his prey no matter what. It just goes to show.
The only ones that can seem to outsmart Boba Fett are basically Han Solo, Luke Skywalker, Leia, and I guess Darth Vader to some extent.
Yeah.
So those are like the only ones that have been able to pretty much keep up with Fett. Everyone else, they're like literally just below Fett. So there's that indeed. So yeah, and well, he managed to take off Fortuna, and then, well, let's just say that while Fett was transporting off Fortuna to the Slave One, off Fortuna had actually killed himself using Fett's wrist cable. You know, the one he releases from one of his wrists, where it pretty much ensnares his prey with it, with the cord. Well, he apparently had gotten a piece of it from Fett, because Fett actually had used it to yank off a blaster that Fortuna had. And he pretty much choked himself and killed himself. And Fett was like, all right, at least you did the job for me. Because he actually wanted off Fortuna dead. He was worth more dead than alive. So,
Yeah.
so there you go. And then, after that, in regards to flashbacks, then we get to Prince Shizor and his discussion with Palpatine and Vader. Another one.
Yeah.
So, the Django, do you want to go through this one?
Okay. So Prince Azor is pretty much answering accusations from Darth Vader that hey, the Bounty Hunters Guild is still alive and well. You know, your plan didn't really work out, and tries to convince the Emperor to continue. Prince Azor is just trying to tell him that I want to just continue my plot to cull the weaker bounty hunters and just to leave the strong there. But he said his plan is not done yet. Like it's still in its starting phase, and it still needs some more time. That he wants to place an enormous bounty on the head of Trin Vasant. So they pretty much work together, Emperor and Zizor. They want to create this bounty in order to attract these bounty hunters to get this bounty and make sure that the top one comes out from all of this, and pretty much compete for the destruction of the guild from this, because there's going to be putting out a huge bounty out there. It's going to attract everyone, and with the Empire hiring, I mean, the size of this bounty, it seemed like it was going to hire like pretty much everyone. And this particular person is Trin Vasant, who was a former Imperial stormtrooper who left, wanted for the slaughter of his entire ship's company. But this would end up being an elaborate plan by the Emperor and Caesar.
So, yeah, basically, Shizor needed to convince Palpatine that, hey, my plan, it's still being in production. It's yet to fully be finished. It was just a slight unprecedented event of the guild splitting in two. But he wanted to make sure that it was completely destroyed. And yeah, it certainly was at the end. So yeah. And by the way, once again, Vader was almost close to choking Shizor to death. Like last time he almost
Yes.
did. And this time, almost until, of course, Palpatine said, release him. And so there's that. And at one point in this conversation, like Vader actually kind of mocks or insults Palpatine in a way, or at least angers Palpatine. And Palpatine's like, "Know your place, Vader." And he was like choking Vader. It seemed like it at one point. Like holy shit. And Shizor in his mind was like, yeah, wrong move, Vader. You should have not said that. Oh my god. Like Vader and Shizor, I think they hate each other more here than what we saw in Shadows of the Empire. Well, they hate equally, but I think this book emphasizes more their hatred. Even though Shadows of the Empire is way more focused on Shizor than this
Oh
one's.
yeah, yeah, agreed.
So, but yeah, that was kind of funny. And yeah, I mean, not many pretty much, well, managed to get around their mistakes in front of Palpatine. Like, Vader, well, the only reason he stayed alive is because it's Darth Vader. Like, and Palpatine needs a competency apprentice. And even though he had a few chances to replace Vader, well, let's just say those chances were not able to take hold of. For example, Starkiller was one of them, but he died in aboard the Death Star. Kellen Marek.
Hmm.
So there's that, and of course later Luke Skywalker, but we don't have that one. So yeah, definitely interesting. And so there's that. And then back to the present time, Neela was like asking, wait, how do you know this? Like, how do you know this conversation between Shizor and Palpatine and Vader? Like, were you there? And then I was like, no, I was not there. It's simple. I just have my own sources inside the Empire and Black Sun. Some that I trust, others that I need credits in order to have it delivered to me. So he basically had his own sources inside Black Sun and the Empire, which proves how he pretty much knew about, well, that conversation as well as everything else that happened in the Bounty Hunter Wars. So, yeah. What do you think of that, Django? That Dengar actually has his own sources inside Black Sun and the Empire.
I mean, you know that bounty hunters all have their own connections in a way, but to think that Dengar, of all people, would have these connections is interesting to see. I know I didn't expect it, but it does make sense considering he's a bounty hunter. So
Yeah. The only Bounty Hunters I can think of that actually have like their own legit sources. Boba Fett is the number one. He has his own sources. They're like top of the mark. Like almost nothing gets away from his ears. So, yep, or his eyes. So there's that. Next, I guess would be Dengar or Boss because they also have their own sources. And Boss actually knew a bit more in regards to Boba Fett when it came to the Bounty Hunter Wars. At least that's something that later on is alluded to in this book. And there's Dengar, of course. So I think those three have their own sources. As for the other bounty hunters, I don't know. I would assume IG-88 has its own, considering that they're like 4 IG-88s and working simultaneously. So maybe. I don't know about the others. Suckers, Forlom. I don't know about them. What do you know? Do you think they have like their own sources, at least as good as the top three: Boba, Dengar, Bosk?
definitely the rest of them. I don't know about Zuckus. I don't think he is that bright of an individual to have those connections. But Bosk definitely, I would think. IG-88. See, I don't know because he's a. It's kind of hard to say for him and Forlom.
Yeah, I could see that. Indeed. So yeah. Now back to the flashback. So now we get into Trin Bosant, aka the capture for him. So the jungle, do you want to go for what is the plan to capture him? Like,
Okay, the plan. So Boba Fett is working with Bosk of all people to capture this bounty, and they know that Trimbasan is a very highly sought bounty, and he's worth quite a bit. So Boba wants to have Bosk with him. So he tells Boss to kind of distract him in a way, and get him talking, and eventually drop his guard. And I don't remember the exact plan. I think he.
I got it here. So basically, the plan was for I guess in some way, both Bosk and Fett show up, and Bosk quote unquote betrays Boba Fett and lowers Boson's defenses by it until Fett manages to later take Boson by surprise, and pretty much they both take him prisoner. So that was the idea of the plan, but of course Fett didn't go into specifics because he never does with his partners. He lives in like guessing and just doing their part. So there's that. So yeah, that's the rough summary of the plan. But do you wanna go with what actually happened to Django?
Yeah, so Bosk is talking up with Trimbasan, and things don't go the way as expected because Boba Fett is not there. He's trying to figure out what to say to him, and he tells him, "Hey, there's these other bounty hunters out there. They're trying to get you. I can help you out." And he's like, "Okay, okay, I understand." And then he pulls a gun on him and tells him, "No, I just don't trust you. Not at all." This is just paraphrasing. But yeah, they eventually get into a fight, and one of his guys, Trimbasan, actually hits Bosk on the head. This other person, hired by Trimbasan, is eventually hits Trimbasan, and they get into a fight, and he captures him, and he removes his helmet, and it's Boba Fett in disguise. And Bosk is kind of pissed off, like, "Hey, what the hell is this? This was not the plan." And but it eventually worked out, you know. But while they're talking, Trim Basan presses a button, and the whole freaking area just becomes like this giant like battleground of sorts, like this machines sprouting and everything, and it becomes chaos. But in the end, Boba Fett does manage to get him, and Bosk is is just struggling. But they do get Trimbasan and they go back to the ship, and yeah, it eventually worked out, but a little messy in the end.
Oh my! Like all Bosk did there was just was just be a bit of well, I don't want to say backup because Boba Fett seemed to be ahead of pretty much everything. Bosk was just there kind of for show as a
Yeah,
distraction.
yeah,
Oh my god, that's something. So yeah, like what Bosk was like, I hope this machine doesn't crush me, and Fed is like, I already captured Trim Basant. That is funny. Like I like seeing how Bosk is like always one step behind Fett. Which, oh, speaking of that, we'll get another one step behind soon enough. So there, but yeah, so Boba Fett's plan, in summary, was basically Bosk and Boba were like talking in communications, and Boba assumed that somehow Trim Basant had gotten a hold of the communication frequency that they were using, and Boba wanted Basant to assume that he betrayed Bosk and left him to die there. Even going as far as making Bosk believe that he also like betrayed him. But turns out, no. In reality, well, Boba was disguised as one of the Imperial miners, and well, there you go. That was the whole plan, the entire time, and it made sense that Bosk didn't know about it. Because imagine if he actually knew about it.
yeah. That's the thing.
Yeah. And after all that happened and they got their bounty, Bosk was like, "Yeah, I think I don't want to work with you again." So yeah, and then back at Slave One. Well, wait. Well, before we get to that, so there's basically another flashback scene with Shisor, in which he actually went to talk to Kudar Mubat about his final stage of the Bounty Hunter Wars plan ready. And that stage is, well, Boba's gonna come here to the Ghostling Nest to get his credits and trade in Basant, except that Shisor and his Black Sun forces will instead kill both Basant and Fett. And that's basically the setup for the third book. AKA, because Basant is a hard merchandise, well, the battle for the hard merchandise is going to happen in the next book. So that's why I said before that the third book being called hard merchandise makes a lot of sense when you consider that this book is pretty much setting up the events of the battle for that merchandise. So, yep. And also, so back in Slave One, well, what happened, Django, with Bosk and Boba Fett on their way to the Ghostling Nest?
Well, as to be expected, things don't work out. So Bosk ends up betraying a Boba Fett and wants to take the bounty for himself. Now, before this point, we must mention that to get in good graces Boba Fett with Bosk, he showed the dead body of Zuckuss. So he killed Zuckuss, and he showed his dead body as a good favor for Bosk because he did remember in book one he did shoot at Bosk, and he was on the other side. So Boba killed him and showed him his dead body, and he was below his ship. So as Bosk is putting him in the prison and ready to kill him and everything or whatever it is, take the bounty off his hand, Bosk has all the weapons. He's watching Boba very carefully, looking at weapons and everything. He strips him down of all his weapons and stuff like that. However, there is one thing that he did not recognize with Boba because he always has a trick up his sleeve. He has a device, a communication device with a not so dead Zuckuss who came back alive and puts a gun to on the back of Bosk's back. And Bosk is like, "What? I thought you were dead." But he wasn't. He was not dead. He was playing dead. He faked it the whole time, and it was hook, line, and sinker for him. And Zuckuss was working with Boba Fett at the time. And then Boba's like, "Hey, just give me the blaster now. I'll take care of this." And Zuckuss is like, "What? No, I got this." And he's like, "No, just give me the blaster." So he takes the blaster away, and he's like, "Okay, both of you go in the prison ship or go in the hull." And Zuckuss is like, "Wait, what? Thought we were working together." But Boba, in prototypical fashion, is like, "I work alone," and he was just using both of them. So yeah, that happened. They were in the prison hall, but Bosk, in his last ditch attempt, attacks Boba and tries to flee, and goes to an escape pod, and has a thermal detonator with him. And he's like, "Don't do any sudden movements now." And Boba is ready to. I mean, he's just kind of frozen there at the moment. But he tries to distract him by throwing Zuckuss in there, and they shoot the escape pod out, and Bosk manages to throw the thermal detonator in the ship, which actually explodes in the ship, a Boba Fett ship, and damage some of it. So we don't know where Bosk and Zuckuss is at the time, but they managed to escape managed to flee in the escape pod in the middle of nowhere. And yeah, Boba is still with the bounty, and in a slightly damaged slave ship.
Okay. Okay, so it cracks me up because not only common knowledge of not trusting Boba Fett, but also there was this one point in this book where Court of Court has, or no, I think it was Shizor, who pretty much said that you don't let your enemy get his hands on any weapon. Don't even lay it on the ground. And Boba at the end is like, give me the gun. And Zuckuss just like gives it and is like, yeah, now both of you. And you're like now both of you are pretty much not getting anything. I find that small foreshadowing a bit interesting in how I guess Shizor was like, yeah, moral of the story, don't let your enemy have any weapon of any kind. And good job, Zuckuss. You you proved Shizor right in that sense. Indirectly, of course, but he proved it right. Oh my god. I found that funny. Oh my
Yeah,
god.
yeah.
So there's that indeed. Indeed. And finally, now we get to the present events in regards to Court of Kuat. Okay, so Django, do you want to go do you want to say how this went, or shall I do it?
Okay. So I think I know the majority of this.
Okay, go.
So Kuat of Kuat is planning to have a meeting with the other ruling families of the Kuats, and pretty much deal with all the things that are going on with that. So he talks to a bunch of the other ruling family members, and they say that, oh, you're deceiving us, you're stabbing us in the back, you're making Kuat drive yards look terrible because we found out some important information that we found out about you. And CJ, maybe you want to go into the information that they found out about what Kuat is doing.
Okay, so for those that remember from the first book, apparently Quad of Quad had this droid that pretty much reported to him in regards to what happened in Jabba's palace. And basically, remember from the first book, the recording that he had in his private quarters that he pretty much replicated in real time. And so he was like looking at it. His mind focused on Boba Fett and everything, in regards to what happened. Because Quad of Quad, what he wants right now is Fett dead. He wants Fett dead, tie up all those loose ends. So there's that indeed. And somehow the biggest rebelling family of the Quads, the Knailin family, they somehow got a hold of not only those private recordings, but they even got a hold of other bits of information regarding Quad of Quad, like how he has made dealings with the Black Sun and certain other things. And that is some insane amount of evidence. Like somebody from inside Quad of Quad's inner circle had betrayed him, and there's only one other person that pretty much had access to Quad of Quad's private chambers. And who would that be, the Django?
His top security man.
Mm-hmm. Fenald. Yep. He sold out and he gave everything to the Knailin, or nearly everything. Because there were a few things that actually the Knailin didn't know in regards to what Quote Unquote actually wanted. But they did have a good amount to try to make a compelling case that Quote Unquote was, well, definitely acting against the others. So, yeah. And yeah, the meeting definitely was not going well as planned. And in the last parts of the meeting, well, what happened to Django?
So, Quat is pretty pissed off, and he's kind of desperate to a point where he finds out some rather interesting stuff and goes to the life support system of one of the elders of the other Quat family and is ready to sort of pull the plug in the case and mess up with the machinery for that system. But he is attacked by his security guard, and he gets into a brawl with him. And then there's also another person, I'm blanking on the name, who shows up to actually defend Kuat of Kuat to become eventually another security person for him. Yeah, I'm blanking on the name.
The woman you're talking about is Kodir of Kulbelt.
Yes. Yeah. So she does assist Kuat as well. And eventually, I think he gets killed, the security guy, or he gets captured in
He
some way.
got like either captured because he was still alive, just knocked unconsciously.
Hmm. Yeah. So after that happens, Kuat eventually goes back to the life support system and shows the evidence that this guy's have been dead for quite some time and has been used in some nefarious way, and shows this evidence to all of the different Kuat family members, and they're pretty much just shocked over this whole thing. And this actually leads to Kuat of Kuat pretty much just in a positive light because he found out some pretty bad stuff against their really senior high guy who may have been dead for some time and being used in such a nefarious way that Kuat found out about this, that this actually helps him and tremendously. So this is very good for Kuat of Kuat.
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed. So yeah, the Gnalin, they were humiliated, wrecked, so they pretty much had to leave in disdain with that. And Guad, well, he left with Kodir of Kubelt. And in their way towards back to Quad of Quad's own workplace, well, they had some discussions, and the discussions between Quad of Quad and Koldir of Cool Belt, well, apparently she knew all along that the Gnailin Elder was dead a long while ago, just as Quad also knew, though he had suspicions. And she, not only that, but she also knew that Quad of Quad wanted to take down Shizor all along. Compared to the Gnailin, which they thought that Quad was like making business with Black Sun, in reality, Quad wanted Shizor dead. Because Shizor was like the biggest threat to the Quad Drive Yards, at least from the eyes of Quad of Quad. So, yeah. The small droid that was inside the Slave 1 that had the recording of Luke's homestead with the pheromones sent, in reality, the pheromones sent in that recording droid, it was actually planted there by Quad to try to have Luke Skywalker pretty much think that it was Shizor who had pretty much sent the Empire to kill his aunt and uncle. But in reality, no, it was just the Empire just killing the aunt and uncle. So the pheromone sent in there was planted there by Quad of Quad. So that actually was a plan that failed because, of course, Shizor's now dead. Because basically, this is happening at the same time as Return of the Jedi. So, by that point, Shizor was already dead. So not only that, but also Luke Skywalker was busy, Dagobah and then Endor. So that too. So that happened, and another thing. Apparently, Codier, she asked Quad who was the dancing girl, not the Twi'lek, the other dancing girl, the one that looked human, and Quad was like, "Who was that?" And Codier was like, "That girl is Katil of Cool Belt from the Cool Belt family from Quad Drive Yards." And, well, Cody recognized her from the hologram, and she pretty much said that, yeah, that is Katil of Cool Belt. But because she sometimes said Neela, we called her Neela. Oh. Yep. So the same Neela that right now in the present is pretty much riding with Boba Fett and Dengar is basically Katil of Cool Belt. And basically why she ended up in Jabba's palace, we'll figure out in the next book, Hard Merchandise. So, yep. What do you think of that, Django?
Yeah, it definitely leaves on a cliffhanger for sure. I mean, just like the first book, but this one is definitely reveals a lot of incredible things for sure. I mean, that's just great.
Mm-hmm.
Connection with Neela, and she's actually royalty all along.
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed. So that definitely is interesting. And that discussion ended with Kuat trying to kill Kodir, but Kodir was pretty fast, and she pretty much managed to overpower Kuat, and they settled on, now you know that I'm in business, so don't try that again. And they pretty much went on working together. So, yep, that happened. And Kodir ended up being the new head of security for Quad of Quad, replacing Fenold. So, that happened. And, well, there is one small bit of a present scene in which basically Boba was like talking with Neela that, did you get everything? Did you get the whole story that you wanted? And Neela was like, kinda. There's still more, but I'll just let Dengar rest a bit until he's told me the whole thing. So, and then they pretty much were like just a bit of discussions, and, well, who knows what waits us in the third book. So, yeah, that's the end of that book. So, the Django, what do you think?
Another great read, and yeah, this definitely shows more of the past, like we mentioned, but it definitely reveals a lot of key information with all the key members, Zizor, Boba Fett, Neela, really important information with her, Kuat of Kuat, trying to play both sides and trying to come out on top to be like just to come out as more in favor with the Empire and play the rebels at the same time and just to come out on top of the whole situation. But he's probably not the most suited person to do that. But I guess we'll find out and what will happen with the third book with Hard Merchandise.
Yes, indeed. And yeah, I myself also think that it was definitely a great and interesting read. And yeah, I can't wait to see what happens in the third book. So yeah, but before we finish, of course, there's one last thing to do, and that is, of course, expand the universe references. Now, of course, there are some that are going to be listed in the screen, being the same ones from some of the same ones from the previous book, the obvious Shadows of the Empire, Tales of Bounty Hunters, like that sort of stuff. The most obvious ones that you cannot get away with, like they're obvious. So now we're going to mention some new ones that are in this book specifically. So, Django, do you got ones of your own?
No, so you can pretty much say everything.
Okay, well, some of these are from most of the essential guides. For example, the member of the True Guild, the one that went to talk with Kudar Mudat, he actually is in the complete Star Wars Encyclopedia and in the Bounty Hunter's Code from the Files of Boba Fett, the same book that also has Kudar Mudat, surprisingly. And then we got the Nimgoria system located in the Yemeni sector in the Outer Rim territories. Basically, that's first mentioned in Essential Atlas, but apparently the Nimgorian saber wasps were actually first mentioned here in this book, and they also were mentioned in the Imperial Commando 501st. So, yep, there's that there. And, well, then well, to put it simply, Trin Bosant, the guy that was the ex-Imperial Stormtrooper Commando, the one that had the big prize in the head, he appears in Aura Singh, Dawn of the Bounty Hunters, as well as the New Essential Guide to Characters, and the official Star Wars Fact File 27, and even the Essential Reader's Companion. So, yeah. And a bit of interesting fact, so apparently this Bosant, it says that he was like relatively old by human standards upon his inclusion, resulting death in Emperor Palpatine's plans involving the Bounty Hunters Guild and Boba Fett. So it's possibly old enough to have been a stormtrooper in the Clone Wars, but it's possible that this may not be a clone, because you remember Episode 2 pretty much had a good chunk of stormtroopers be clones, and eventually over time, after Episode 3, some of them were like, some of the clones were either retiring or died, they were replaced by actual normal humans. So basically, Bosant, it's possible that he is not really a clone trooper, or maybe he is, because the book obviously doesn't specify, and no other source actually specifies it. Wikipedia claims that possibly he was a clone, it's just that Boba Fett didn't want to acknowledge any shared heritage in front of Bosk, so maybe it's not completely impossible, but given these books, I think it's probably just, who knows, like, maybe he was an actual, like, human, because there have been a few human officers in the Grand Army of the Republic, even in the Clone Wars. If you remember, there was Yularen, if you remember, and a few others. So basically, yeah, I could see him not really being a clone trooper. Could have been a clone trooper, could have been not in regards to Bosant. Who knows? So I'm leaning towards him not being a clone trooper. What do you think, Django?
Yeah, definitely don't see him as a clone trooper.
Okay, so there's that. Now we get to the houses. The House Gnilin, the big rivals of Kuat, they first appeared here, but they actually have a mention in Star Wars Adventures 5, The Shapeshifter Strikes. Pretty interesting, and that's actually a tie-in novel to Episode 2, actually. So another one of those, which last time the first book there was Adventures 4, the one that had a tie-in to Episode 2. Is this one. So it's interesting. And Cause of Nylin also appeared in Star Wars Adventures 5. So it's kind of possible that the Nylin family, in particular Cause of Nylin, have a bit of history with either Jango Fett or Sam Wessel, possibly more Sam Wessel. So a bit of info right there. So there is that. And then the desiccation of Golondre B, the one that occurred in 10 BBY, basically the first decade of the Empire. So basically, this is an event that was first mentioned in the slave ship, but it was actually first identified as such in the Essential Atlas, first identified as the desiccation of Golondrene. And it also was mentioned in the Complete Star Wars Encyclopedia, and even another source called Enter the Unknown, which is basically the official rule supplement for the Star Wars Edge of Empire role-playing game. So we got that too. And then basically The Telbun, which are basically middle-class humans from the Kuat system, they actually first appeared here, but it's possible that their first appearance could have been X-Wing Wedge's Gamble, though that was impersonated. So not really like the actual first appearance of a true Telbun. But they have made other actual appearances in the New Jedi Order books, and also Tatooine Ghost. And they have several sources, like the Course on the Core Worlds, Complete Star Wars Encyclopedia, Central Atlas, so on and so forth. And then the Guild Reform Committee, which also first appeared here in the flashbacks, in the Aura Sing Dawn of the Bounty Hunters, the New Central Guide to Chronology, the Threads of the Galaxy, Complete Star Wars Encyclopedia, so on and so forth. And so there's that. The Strategic Insertion Battalion, the one that Boson was a part of, Aura Sing Dawn of the Bounty Hunters, and the Shovel-Handed Miner, basically the miners that pretty much were on the payroll of Basant, those that we saw that were helping him. Apparently, they are also mentioned in Darth Plagueis, the book. Yep, they first appear here, and they appear in Darth Plagueis. Even that book is referenced here, if you can even believe it. And there's, of course, some other sources, the Unseen Planets of Episode 2 and the Essential Atlas. And, well, finally, there's a few references to Star Wars Galaxies, like how a green diamond that Chisor pretty much had apparently first appears here, but it's actually mentioned as well, or shows up in Star Wars Galaxies. So there's that there. And apparently Mando Motors supposedly was mentioned here in the slave ship in the book, but actually first appeared in Star Wars Galaxies Jump to Light Speed. Yep. So it was one of the first sources to mention Mando Motors, but it was Star Wars Galaxies that first showed it. Before we saw it in other sources like Order 66, Republic Commando novel, or the Imperial Commando 501st, or the Legacy of the Force books. Though its origins could be linked all the way back to the Dark Empire source book. So, yep, Mando Motors has been a thing, reference here, and so there you go. So yeah, those are the ones that I seem to have, the Django. Do you got any others, or what do you think, or nothing else?
Nothing else.
Alright, then I guess now we shall get into the, well, conclusion to this podcast. So the Django, go ahead.
Another great book to the Bounty Hunter Wars. I'm definitely really enjoying this series so far, and as someone who's never read the Bounty Hunter Wars, it's just awesome to see a more different style, a more different take on Star Wars, and not so much a run and gun sort of thing that I was expecting with like Bounty Hunters, but something with more intrigue, deception, and treachery, and just a lot of talking that definitely sets up a lot. It's not a prototypical, or it's just a different style of Star Wars story, and I really respect K.W. Jeter for really taking us in that direction. And for all that's happened, mostly in the past with Boba Fett, Bosk, and them dueling it out, and them always having their own agendas along the way, which is really fun to see. You also have Prince Zizor, which I really thought he was only in Shadows of the Empire, but he's in quite a bit of stuff, which I was really surprised by, including this story. But yeah, and then Kuat of Kuat, and just a lot of just interesting stuff that's going on behind the scenes, and that will come down to the final book with hard merchandise. So I just really can't wait to see how this trilogy ends, and so far I'm just really enjoying it.
Yep. And yeah, it will be interesting seeing how it ends, given that it seems like when this trilogy ends, so will end the events of Return of the Jedi. Because I forgot to mention that the end of the second book actually has Boba Fett mentioning that something's brewing up in Endor.
Yep.
So yeah, it's very possible that once the third book ends, pretty much the Battle of Endor would have also ended. So that'll be interesting to see. So yeah. As for my thoughts on this book, I think it's great. It's definitely way more interesting than I had anticipated before even starting reading this trilogy. And given that I already had a bit of history with this book, well, it's certainly good that it has definitely lived up to, well, actually it kind of exceeded my expectations in a way. So yeah, it's actually great. And Yeah, I'm definitely excited for the third book, and yeah, this definitely gets my recommendation. And fans of Boba Fett, yeah, just like the previous book, this one is a must read. No surprise there. So, yep.
Yep.
And for next podcast, well, we'll definitely have the third part released. So, there's that. So, with that in mind, we'll see you guys on the next State of Star Wars podcast. Bye bye.
See you guys.